Welcome to the Festival of Entrepreneurs, recorded live at the NEC in Birmingham. Over the next few minutes, you'll hear from some of the most incredible founders, investors, and business leaders who joined us this year.
Let's start off with a sort of overview. There we go. I'm going to talk about me, so you all know who I am, what I do. I'm going to talk about 3 or 4 disciplines, because this is about a conversation about bringing things together more than anything else. It's not just about, if there's anyone in the room who hasn't heard of R&D tax credits, please put your hand up, because I can talk to you later on after the meeting. They're good. Intellectual property, law and digitization, because that's really the most important part of this process. And then I'm going to talk about accounting and intangibles. And then I'm going to talk to you about how the fact that we believe that we've now generated a new asset class. Hopefully you'll all get that when we get that far. So let's start off with me. I've had a fairly varied international career in a whole pile of technologies. What I did do when I first came back to the UK in early 2000 was set up the first independent R&D tax advisory service. There's a few thousand of those out there now. If you haven't had a phone call from one of those, you probably aren't running a business. But when I did it, I was the first. I sold the business to Foresight, stepped out and sort of retired. But during the time that I was restricted, I got involved in looking at the question of intellectual property. Hence, I'm on this stage. So, a bit more about me. Well, I'm not. I'm not a financial accountant. Any financial accountants in the room? Keeping it quiet then. Okay. I'm not a lawyer. Any lawyers in the room? No. I'm not a patent attorney. Any patent attorneys in the room? So you must all be business people. Just give me a better presentation for me. Okay, that's good news, right? Right. And I'm not a tax advisor, except I do know a lot about R&D tax credits. Okay. So, bringing different disciplines together. This is about considering how a number of different facets of process, all the way from tax to assets, actually, when considered in the way the world's changing, will allow us to do something that's not been done before. So, back to the disciplines. I'm not going to spend ages doing a presentation on R&D tax credits. I don't think any of you need that. It's just that there is an essence of that which I want to refer to in terms of understanding intellectual property. I'm going to try and explain intellectual property. As you'll find throughout this presentation, there is a real issue about definition in this world. Anything that we can't physically touch, feel, see becomes quite difficult for us to verbalize. And that's 90% of the problem where the accountants struggle when we start talking about intangibles. I'm going to talk a little bit about digitization and the law, because one of the things we all have to live with is in fact that the law takes a long time to catch up with what's going on with technology. And then I'm going to talk about intangibles, subject which is always quite difficult when you're sitting in front of an accountant, I assure you. And then I'm going to explain to you why there's a new asset class. Okay, so we've asked the question about anybody in the room who's not involved. It's an interesting fact that if you've done an R&D claim, the chances are, when you've been paid out by the revenue, you've thanked your advisor, hopefully, and you've shoved it in a drawer. There are a few, mainly because of things like patent box arriving, which I'll talk about a little bit, who've actually got more committed and decided maybe they should do something with whatever they developed. And occasionally there's a few that have got involved in licensing or marketing the source code of their IT. But in the main, it just goes in the drawer, which is a waste. Like in 2010, the government introduced patent box. At the time, all of the tax advisors thought, oh, here's another opportunity. They didn't quite understand. The only thing that we learned from the exercise was that, in fact, the production of a claim for a patent is not too dissimilar to a claim for R&D. The only difference is the language. So instead of talking about a novel step, the novelty of in a patent, we use the word science advance. And that's what they use in R&D, but that in principle is the same thing. It's important we remember that. So here's the first big fact of the day that you should try and keep with you till the end of this presentation. And that is, if you've had a successful R&D claim, and by the way, success doesn't mean you got paid by the revenue, because to those who understand R&D claims, you can be paid by the revenue even when you fail. They're quite reasonably quite committed to the idea. I was talking to one of the strategy guys at HMRC a couple of weeks ago, and he even thought that failure was intellectual property on the grounds you knew what not to do, which I thought was a stretch. But in fact, you create a piece of intellectual property in that process, something of value which you shouldn't really be putting in the drawer. So let's talk about what intellectual property means. This is a fascinating exercise. This is the first stage when we get to trying to actually verbalize or write down exactly what it is, where we talk about something we don't know what it is, and we don't have easy words to explain it. So IP refers to the creation of the mind. What we then do is tag it with all these things that we can physically touch, feel, understand. When I lifted this from one of the chatbots, they lifted it from WIPO. So, and WIPO is the World Intellectual Property Organization, so this is the closest thing you can get to the right answer. But in fact, you'll see that most of it's to do with all these things it might be in or is part of, as opposed to what it is. Creation of the mind. In that definition that we've just looked at, they start talking about a thing called an intangible asset. So let's look at another definition. Once again, we're in that space where instead of actually defining what an intangible asset, we talk about what it looks like, how we refer to it, what it could be. Because it's quite difficult, especially for an accountant that's used to touching, feeling, seeing things and counting them, to deal with somebody that doesn't do that. By the way, an intangible asset, whatever value it's set at, is just as good as a tangible one. Just isn't something that you could actually touch or feel or see, basically. So, if we move on to probably the greatest creation of the mind there's been in the last few years, the internet, which, if you imagine from 1960, when it was a small military exercise, to the thing it is today, is probably one of the most incredible sort of changes in our society that's ever taken place. And more recently, some of the advances in terms of blockchain delivery and big data management are driving that to the point where most of us don't know where that's going to go, but it's going to affect all of us in our lives as we go further forward. And as usual, the law is way behind. It's a tortoise in this race, understandably. I mean, most of us generally think the government's not keeping up with anything, so the idea they're going to keep up with this level of innovation is probably not surprising. However, amazingly enough, the UK government, in their wisdom, in front of the rest of the world, I might add, are about to pass an Act of Parliament. And this is the Act of Parliament in its fullness. Amazing enough, it's 5 lines, actually, in the documentation. It refers to a thing. It's about ownership and objects of property. Anybody in the room own any crypto? At the moment, I have to tell you that you don't legally own crypto. Because you can't. Because as far as the law is concerned, it isn't something you can own. Amazing enough. The good news for you all is it's about to change. This act is actually at the committee stage. Normally at committee stage, that's where they look at it and decide they're going to deal with all the members and tidy up the wording. There's not a lot of it, so it shouldn't take them long. It went through second reading in July, and our new Home Secretary told me before she moved from the Justice Ministry, it would all be cleared up and sorted out by now. But it will get cleared through this recess. So very soon this will become law, King's Assent. And as law, it will mean that you can own a thing. It's really difficult when you can't define something that you have to thrash around words. So the Law Commission, the Justice Department came up with a thing. This is a thing. It's important that you get to understand what's in what. And back to the earlier definitions, what we're going to attempt to do now is look at types of things. So some of the things are, it's funny, isn't it? But this is going through Parliament, right? 5-line act. There's nothing else in this act but this 5 lines, the thing. Okay, so one of the things is cryptocurrency. You're lucky, guys. Now you'll be able to own it legally. Might be the forerunners of the fact that we'll all start dealing in crypto soon. There is a department in HMRC, by the way, called the Intangible Department. There's 5 of them in there already. Amazingly enough, right? And their job will be to decide how they're going to tax you on crypto. Trust me, they're working on it as we speak. Because if you can own something, you can certainly tax something, can't you? But back to my presentation. The thing I'm interested in is called an NFT. Hands up if you've heard of an NFT. Everybody know what an NFT is? Would anybody like me to explain an NFT very quickly? Okay. Go on to that. An NFT is a non-fungible token. To explain a non-fungible token is quite simple. If I borrowed your car for the weekend and I returned you a different car the next day, you'd be pretty upset. Yeah, it might do. It means I can write you back a bit, but it's still not be your car because your car is unique to you. It's a unique car. And fungibility is about uniqueness. Right? So in other words, if it's non-fungible, it means it's unique. Fungible is, if I'd lent you a tenner, you could give me back any tenner as long as it wasn't a forged tenner, I'd be happy. Okay. So fungibility is about that idea of something unique. And blockchain, although it might be the place where they build cryptocurrency, is also a place where they could build digital nodes of uniqueness. So you can put anything you like into a blockchain node, non-fungible token. So you can create a digital imprint of a document. It's quite interesting as well, because if you were to be able to have this unique confidential code, right, it would allow you to do something which is going to date stamp the particular thing you put inside the code, as long as you're certain that you can protect it from a security point of view. Now, I know we keep circling round, but that's part of the problem of definition. So if we go back to our intangibles, and we start talking, remember, the thing and intangibles are about to come together now. As far as UK accountants are concerned, there is a facility in UK GAAP. Everybody understand UK GAAP is the general accounting administrative process, i.e. so what all auditors use when they decide whether they'll put something on the balance sheet of a company or in the books. There is a way of doing this today. It's called FRS 102. I am not going to bore you with the accounting process. All I can say is that you can, if you wish, record intangible activity onto a balance sheet. One of the real requirements of intangibility is called separability. To date, the imagination has been to sort of get somebody to come along and value your IP and try and work out what it might be worth. Right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a second, because in truth, if you've got a piece of intellectual property that you've developed and you could protect it, you can digitize it using the thing process, and you can stick it on your balance sheet, it's an asset. And if you can follow the rules of accounting that are required that says each year you can test it for impairment, which you can, then it's a true asset. The only piece of accounting I do understand very well is that when you put something onto the balance sheet, the cost you place on it is the difference between its value and the cost of you producing it. So as long as the value of it's more than the cost of you producing it, you'll use the cost. So if you can work out what the costs are, then you can value it on the first occasion. And the good thing about an R&D claim, of course, is it values R&D projects. This is an interesting graph. This was produced by a company called Ocean Tomo. Those who have tracked what's going on in the IP world will have possibly heard of this company. They do have a London office, but they're a US-based business involved in intellectual property. They worked out that, in fact, the public sector, the bit that talk about public companies, stock exchanges, that today, let's got this graph up, 90% of those companies are intangible. We're all investing in fresh air. These guys have achieved this by a little quirk in the accountancy process that says that if you acquire intangible assets, you can stick them on your balance sheet straight away. And how do they calculate that? You say, well, they say, okay, if you're going to buy this business for £5 million and its balance sheet is £2 million, then £3 million is intangible benefit that you can drive onto your balance sheet. So through an acquisitive merger process, and occasionally I have to add some imaginative accountants who've worked out how you can put the intangible, the IP in one company and sell it to yourself in another company, you can get to the point where 90% of your business is actually funding intangibles. It's a bit unfair, really, isn't it? Because all of these big public companies using their cash and their acquisitiveness have found a way of valuing their companies using this technique, and none of the mid-market businesses, none of the SME get to use this at all, because you can't stick this on your balance sheet easily if you just say, well, I've invented this, I'm going to do it this way, until now. Because now, you can. Digital novel assets. This, by the way, this is our, sorry, I should keep up. This is our internal name for it. And when I was talking to HMRC with this, they got a little nervous that we might get confused about criminality. So it may not be the name it ends up with. There's been a lot of talk about whether it should be digital innovative assets or intangible assets, but they are digital. And the whole idea behind this whole presentation is that this product, once this legislation passes, is something you can do. Why do I believe that? Well, back to my point. If you can take an R&D claim and it's been successful, i.e. you have advanced science, then you've actually got a piece of intellectual property. And if you can cost that, which you can because of the value of the claim, then you can price it. And if you can price it, you can build it into your asset base. So, simple. So you may already be sitting on a potential asset for your company. And if you are, you're welcome to come and talk to me afterwards, and I can talk to you about how we can help you. So, we're back in the NFT. Let's not beat ourselves up too much on that. When we carry out this process, basically what we are doing is we are costing out, using the existing accounting rules, those expenses that can be used as cost against the process. When we've completed that exercise, right, and we've collected all of the important data that surrounds this development, that might be source code, that might be copyright drawings, might be whatever it is that we can actually put in a secure file, and then we can digitize, we can create this asset. Very simple in principle. What is good news, right, is that we've designed a system for being able to securitize this asset and protect them. The wonderful thing about this scheme is that this is quite disruptive to patenting. Not that I'm planning to stop that happening place. I'm just saying that the great thing about this digital asset is it's confidential. Because nobody knows what's in the box except the owner of the box, because the box is closed. Even if they were to break into the blockchain, which is quite a difficult thing to do, they're only going to find a number in there. They're going to have to try and track that number back to the documentary files, which is secured offline. So the ability to be able to protect something, and wonderful thing about copyright, by the way, it lasts longer than patenting. And if you haven't told the world what you're doing, then you don't have to give it to the world. So you can remain with this as long as you like. It is feasible that you could, and we'll come on to valuation in a second, but it's feasible you can value it each year on the basis it's there forever. If I was Cadbury's and I did this with their process, they could load it onto their balance sheet. And as they've been doing it for 800 years, it would be difficult to stop anybody saying that the Cadbury company can't continue to treat this as an asset on their balance sheet. Chances are they probably already have it there anyway, but they're a public company. Well, they're owned by Kraft nowadays. So.
Good afternoon. We've got a very special announcement taking place on keynote stage over the next few minutes. None other than Ray Kettle, founder of Ted Bait, on the keynote stage, 2 minutes.
Hopefully I'll get finished soon. I knew you want to rush over there, I understand, but we're nearly there. So, how far have we got? Well, we've done our first. So we have actually produced 7 assets for a client worth £2 million, and it was audited by Assets. They're a top 10 accounting firm. And they're so excited, they want to help us do more. Amazingly enough. It's one of those situations you say, well, okay, so what is the benefit really if I'm doing all this? Well, the first benefit is you're going to strengthen your balance sheet. Stronger balance sheet for a business means it's better when anybody looks at your organization. At the moment, the rather nefarious ways of trying to shove IP in because you bought something or whatever doesn't actually give anybody in the finance world much confidence. They tend to cut it off. But remember, this is about putting individual assets. The £2 million was 7 assets in this company. That's 7 assets they generated through their R&D program. Asset-based lending is the cheapest form of money. Honest. So if you're going to look at where would I like to raise money, and you might say, well, nobody's going to lend against this. NatWest actually did one of their first deals in terms of investing in IP earlier this year. It was a bit imaginative, and I think there was lots of security attached to it, but the fact is they did lend against the IP rather than the physical assets. Within our team, we actually have a RICS qualified surveyor who does red book valuations of IP. He was doing for those big public companies before. So the idea you can't raise money against these assets is probably going to go away fairly quickly. It's confidential and time protective. The wonderful thing about the scheme that we put together, it's designed in such a way that it's also evidential. What that means is that should you want to litigate against somebody else who's trying to steal your technology, you can pass the process, security files, through the courts in such a way that doesn't damage the start date of your freedom to operate, as it's called in the States, and it will allow you to be able to defend your position. The good thing as well is because you've now put these into separate boxes like bricks, you can think about marketing them, licensing them. You can think about how you want to deal with them because you own them as separate organizations. You can trade them. Rather than having this amorphous thing called my IP inside my company, they are individual assets. Same way that you have a motor car on your books or a desk or a chair or anything else. It's going to be more attractive to your investors because you have defined and wrapped up very neatly exactly what it is that you own and you've developed. And the good thing, of course, is it's leveling the playing field with these public companies who've been doing this through a mishmash. Obviously, there's a lot more detail about how it works. I'm not going to get into that here. And obviously, some of the proprietary stuff we've developed, we can keep our eyes on. Right? However, if anybody thinks it might apply to you, please come and talk to us. We are quite interested in trying to develop this. This isn't something we're going to sit on inside our own business. Assets are already working with us. This bit's mine, actually. I think we are in the knowledge revolution. I started talking about NFTs in 2019, and first time I presented on the subject, everybody thought I was a nutter. That's probably true, but the reality is, that this will change the world. There is a belief that non-fungible tokens will be bigger than cryptocurrency within 10 to 15 years. You should understand why that is. It's not about sticking artwork and records on there and hoping you're going to sell a few more than you can, or whiskey or BMWs. It is about this process of creating unique development assets. And this will globalize very fast. And the good thing is the UK government are going to allow us to be the first country who's capable of doing it, because you'll formally own them by the end of this year. Thank you very much for your time. I don't have a card, sorry, but the lady, is she the lady right in the corner over there? She'll take over your deal and we'll get in touch. That's it.
Yeah, has anyone got any questions for Jeremy? Thank you.
Far from boring. That was really, really interesting.
Oh, thank you.
I came across this room by accident. So glad I did. So my question is, can you give some examples of what a DNA could actually be?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually, because the truth is that anything that actually is a science advance, right, with as far as an R&D claim is concerned, will be acceptable. Most companies generally understand today if they've done an R&D claim. Remember, this is about success. Not to belabor the issues of R&D, technological uncertainty is what you're supposed to find in an R&D claim, and overcoming it becomes a science advance. And that moment when you've overcome it is when you generate something that you own. And as far as the HMRC is concerned, at that moment, that something is yours and unique to you, because you not advance the ability of your company, you advance science in general. So therefore, it must be of value. And therefore, it's almost anything that you can get through an R&D claim. There are a lot of other examples of intellectual property which probably won't be catered for in this space and don't really fall into the thing. So trademarks and logos will remain the same issue. Unless you acquire them, you'll not be able to add value to them. So, but in truth, it's almost anything that you can push through an R&D claim. So if you have an R&D advisor who's doing claims for you, and you have had claims which have been success achieved, i.e. you've got to the stage where you've actually proved that whatever you were trying to do works, then that is claimable, and you could actually file that into this process.
So one follow-on question from that. So in order for a layperson like myself to understand what can be classed successfully as a DNA, it has to fall into the R&D credit space?
Not really. If you talk to somebody who knows how that works, you don't have to have necessarily done a claim. What you do need to have gone through a process of spending money on developing something which is unique, novel, innovative, back to science advance, I'm afraid. So as long as you've done something like that can be achieved. There will be other things. What I do know from having talked to a number of the shakers and movers at the top of all these organizations and the government is that over time they anticipate they'll broaden the solution. They'll broaden the solution to what you can actually file into an NFT. And I think in the end they'll allow trademarks and logos, and there will be a point in time where I suppose there'll be a different way that UK GAAP will treat it. Because at the moment, this change, we're managing this change using existing legislation, right, in terms of what's about to happen with the law, but also using the existing rules under the accountancy profession. So it's an exercise where we found a way into this using existing process, But in time, I think some of the rules around FRS 102 will change and they will allow more things. So, for instance, one of the issues is you can't claim for the research part of the activity. You can only claim for the development part, which seems insane to me. Yeah. And I'm sure that will change too. It's just the way that the existing legislation works.
Okay, any more questions?
You can lend me your car.
Pat, just wondering, as it's an intangible asset, would it still be subject to depreciation and how?
Well, that's the interesting issue here, and it's a good question, really. All right, okay. Oh, sorry, she stole your question. She stole your question. There you go. The answer is I don't know that the final outcome. I do understand the issue, and I can say that we have agreed, and it's a case by case. This is where I talked to the lady about intangibles, whole department in HMRC, and she said it's case by case. I don't know what that means, really. Let me explain. As far as legislation around the rest of the world is concerned, intangibles do not depreciate. They are just impaired. Only impaired. So a valuer can come along, look at those assets, and consider whether or not the value is still greater than the cost. Here in the UK, there's sort of we have this rule that suggests that there's supposed to be a 5 or 10 year depreciation program, which doesn't make any sense. And HMRC have fully accepted it doesn't make any sense. So there is a risk at the beginning. Interesting, in the client that we dealt with here and with assets, we've agreed impairment only. We are not going to depreciate. Because these assets that they've generated are things they're going to use within their core business over the next few years. So from that point of view, the only thing that's going to matter, if they stop using this technology, it should be removed. If they continue to use this technology and it's growing their company, why would you want to devalue it? So, and it just depends. As I say, that goes back to whether the nuances of some of these rules will change or not. No problem.
Okay, we've just about got time for one more question, anyone?
Oh, no.
Hi, Jeremy.
I,
Very, very interesting take on the caudal of intangible assets on the balance sheet. But more broadly, the intellectual property question. Given that we're in a hall full of innovative entrepreneurs, why is this the only talk on intellectual property?
I didn't organise to do. I think there is a sort of back to definitions and language and everything else. One of the greatest problems in this world is we don't like going near things that we don't understand, and this is a bit like religion. Really, it gets really difficult because you have to believe, this thing exists as opposed to it existing, and so you wrap definitions around it. And the problem out there is that quite a lot of these entrepreneurs are developing things by the fact that that's the lifeblood of their business. They actually don't really understand the value of them, and they're missing out. So even if they've done an R&D claiming they've been successful, they've filed it in the drawer. Why do I need to get that out for? And then they're quite surprised when they find that somebody else is using the same technology that they use or they had, and they've been driven out the market. There isn't enough understanding about protection. There isn't enough understanding about IP in general anyway. I wasn't asked to come and talk about that. I was talking about this, but the truth is that I could bore the pants off this place on that subject too, as you know, because we've slashed heads before. So yeah, so it is, I'm afraid, one of those things which is quite frustrating is that there tends to be a lot more conversation about, the softer things in a business as opposed to the fact that if you don't fix this bit, you're really shafting your business yourself because it's the key to why your business exists. It's the reason why people do business with you is whatever this is. Yeah.
It's your 90% value.
Yeah. And 90% in public companies, remember, they realise that's where their assets are.
Thanks for watching this special episode from the Festival of Entrepreneurs. Our mission is simple: to help founders and business owners grow faster, think bigger, and take action. And if you were part of the event, thank you for joining us and being part of the community. And if you missed it, don't worry. We'll be back with even more ideas, inspiration, and opportunities to help you take your business to the next level. You can find out more and register for future events at festivalofentrepreneurs.co.uk.